Matt and Rob, practicing pediatrics. Podcast pediatricians rule. Then came COVID. Then came Delta. Made us feel like a fool. Hours and hours, gowning and masking. Sweaty days drag on and on. And just when we thought that the nightmare was over, then came Omicron. COVID days. Well, they were dark and long COVID days, but we stood tall and strong. COVID days. COVID days. All right. All right.
Nice.
It still sucked, but I think it was better than last time.
Yeah. Minimally.
We'll take that. So, live from high atop Caesar Rodney Square in beautiful, wintry downtown Wilmington, Delaware,
We are the Podcast Pediatricians.
I'm Rob Walter.
And I'm Matt Gotthold. Check us out on Facebook and on podcastpediatricians.com, and of course on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play.
And Happy New Year 2022, Matty Ice.
Yeah.
We are back. We're back after a busy, exhausting COVID fall. We've got many podcasts lined up, including an epic migraine two-parter coming up next. And first today, we're going to finish our GI two-parter featuring the wisdom of Dr. Carlo Di Lorenzo. As you recall, a few months ago, we started with regurgitation, and we're going to end with functional GI problems and myths in GI. Of course, first, there has to be some COVID-19 talk. And oh my goodness, what a dizzying last few weeks, Matty.
Ooh-wee. Between spikes in COVID and in influenza A and the holiday season, it's been crazy.
Nuts. It's been nuts.
The COVID pediatric anxiety, depression, mental health crisis continues, and there are just not enough mental health professionals available, especially if kids have no insurance, or if, as is often the case, they have crummy mental health coverage.
And since many of our listeners are Delaware-based, we thought we'd plug a program briefly from the Delaware Psychological Program, funded by a grant by the Delaware Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, which provides up to 6 free therapy sessions for kids and teens. The phone number of the program is 302-635-0311, and probably Brooke Fernandez will answer the phone and hook you up. You can also email them at delpsychology@gmail.com. And Brooke did assure us that they work really hard to find a therapist after those first 6 sessions if the kids really need it. And they really need it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed they do. Yeah, this has been a rough one on everybody.
It is awful. And just to say, we'll get to other stuff, but I mean, this whole thing has been so bad to our pediatric population and kids. I mean, we talked about the mood, anxiety, suicide rates, not surprisingly, have gone up. The behavior rates, problems have gone up. Gun violence against kids has skyrocketed. The social isolation, especially with schools being closed, we gotta keep those schools open even with this Omicron epidemic. And also, math and reading scores have gone way down, the most in decades, and it's pretty predictable because this has really been so hard on our kids. You out there with kids, we feel you. We know.
We do, yeah. We're trying to do our best to be helpful, but sometimes the resources are just seemingly few and far between.
Yeah, but let's catch up, Maddie. It's been a
man.
while. You moved your daughter's wedding.
Well, I didn't move it. Like COVID moved it. If I were going to move it, I would have said, "Here's a check. I'll see you when you get back." not opposed to the whole elopement thing. But yeah, it was supposed to be last spring, and now it's this spring. And although with some a little bit tighter criteria, I think they've tried to curb their guest list back because they anticipate potential problems. And so, of course, you're in, dude.
But I still made it. I was supposed to be on vacation.
Yeah,
went
I
to the
appreciate
new date,
that, man.
So I changed it because I had to be that. And then my daughter got engaged.
Yeah, indeed, Abby.
So that will be likely 2023. What else? We're both music fans, although different types of music. But have you been watching the Beatles Get Back? Peter Jackson?
I have not. I wanted to kind of binge it when I do it, and I do respect Peter Jackson. I'm not a big fantasy guy, but I did really enjoy the Lord of the Rings series.
I think you'll love it because you can actually see them creating new songs. songs. Like they started with the riff of Get Back to Where You Want Belong. It didn't have the words, and like should be John, maybe JoJo. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I also John Lennon. I always think it was like a little bit more serious in some ways, and with Yoko, and he had other his social issues. He's so like childlike,
really,
and playful. So much. It's like Paul McCartney has to reel them in.
That's fun.
And George Harrison quits the band and comes back, and he's brooding. What I also heard is that Ringo didn't love it. I think because the entire time so far, he really does nothing creative at all. And I think that's probably
Octopus's
true.
Garden yet?
No, yes.
Yeah?
So at the very last part I saw, I didn't finish it. He was working on Octopus's Garden. And George Harrison really is the one who helps him, which is nice. And Ringo's great too. But anyway, I certainly recommend it. Any movies?
I did. I saw Don't Look Up.
Me too.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I actually thought it was brilliant.
I thought it was brilliant. And I didn't hit me as first because I'm maybe stupid about that, but it's really about climate change.
Yeah, you know what? I had that pointed out to me after the movie because what I appreciated it as was essentially a satire
of
on
politics,
on culture
and culture, right?
Especially digital culture,
right?
And just so how heavily it weighs into the way people exist these days, and it's so shallow.
And truth is malleable. You know,
Indeed.
whenever you say the truth, well,
absolutely.
look at it a different way.
No, I thought it was hilarious. Some people, some of the reviews that I read, because after I like to watch a movie and then read the reviews usually.
Right.
I was really I said after the movie. Now, of course, I say this every time I come out of a concert, like definitely top 5, dude. Right. but I would say that this one was it was definitely top 5 of the movies I've seen in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Leo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep. Jonah Hill.
He's
great.
He was great,
definitely. And then I saw my first movie in the theater, which was the Spider-Man.
Yeah, how was it?
It was great.
Yeah,
you got to be a
Spider-Man
geek.
guy,
You got to be a geek on Spider-Man. How about them Eagles?
Eagles? Yeah. Hey, listen, we're in another situation where we didn't really expect much this year, and at least they may give us, a playoff game. I mean, I'm not really expecting more than that.
Right.
You?
But
yeah.
I expected nothing. So here's my little fun Eagles thing in the office. I had a college kid come in with a glaring case of dermatographia I've ever seen, which is a condition that's usually benign, where if you take your finger and just write on them, it will instantly turn red, and you can write your name, and your name will pop up.
Yeah.
And I've seen that to
it's
a small degree.
Cool. Yeah.
It gave him Zyrtec, and it's going away. But he was wearing an Eagles cap, and college kid. So I said, "Hey, I'm going to write Eagles on your arms." So I took both his arms and I wrote it. I said, "Wait a minute, it's coming up." And it came up. He's like, and then I was leaving. He goes, "What?" So I wrote Cowboys on both his arms.
Nice.
Now, it gets me through my COVID days. A little bit of
play
humor.
with their heads a little bit.
I was worried he'd be mad, but his father was in the room too, and he thought it was hysterical. So, and that
great.
Cowboys will stay on his arm for like a week probably. So, and then our worst political news of the year. I think we've talked about it before, but we have to say it again. Dr. Oz is running for Senate in Pennsylvania. Oh my God! He lives in New Jersey. He works in New York. Spent his formative years in Delaware. Went to Tower Hill.
Yep.
But he's gonna try to be senator in Pennsylvania, and there's all kinds of ads. I mean, can we just say the word? He sucks.
He does suck.
He sucks, and it's gotten worse during this pandemic.
He's an embarrassment to our profession.
all of us. He insults me as a physician.
He does.
To have him there.
He compromises our integrity.
All right, our disclaimer, man.
All right. We're done trashing Dr. Oz for now. I'm sure it's a topic we'll return to in the future. We are sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk to your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community standards of care. Consulting guidelines has been a challenge lately, hasn't it, Rob?
We'll get to the CDC guidelines in a few minutes.
My head stops spinning.
Oh my God! Number 1, influenza A. It's here. It's bad, right?
Yeah.
And mostly A, not B. And honestly, the kids who have flu are much sicker than the kids who have COVID.
Yeah.
We've had a couple with both at the same time, and also strep and COVID too. Remember, Tamiflu's out there. It doesn't really work that great. You want to give it within 2 days. And the new one, Zofluza.
I did prescribe that one.
Did they get it?
I don't know, because it was like an evening, and the mom was a nurse, and she was asking me.
Nobody has it. There is a coupon.
Like the Good RX and all that.
There is a coupon. You can get it for $30, but because it can cost hundreds. But so far, as I know, nobody has it.
Yeah, I'm still down on Tamiflu.
Yeah.
I keep going back to the same Cochrane reports and everything
Right.
else, where it's essentially
Right.
like, we've been sold a bill of goods on this one,
Right.
as have many governments.
But as we talked about, Sofluza looks better.
Yeah.
It's
It
one
looks
pill,
so much. That's why I'm
12
willing
and
to
above.
prescribe it.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll
I'm
get
happy
that in the
to
future.
prescribe it. Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, talking about COVID vaccines for the 5 to 12-year-olds and boosters for 16 and 17. They just announced that they'll have boosters for 12 to 15, although it's not officially that we can do it yet. So we both are giving them in our office. And how are people taking to them? Are most of your patients getting them?
I'll tell you, it seems like pretty much a 50-50 split. There are a lot of questions as to, well, if you tell me it's not that bad in kids, then why would I? Yada yada yada. Right?
Exactly.
And I get it. I do. I mean, I always try to look at it through the eyes of the parents in my practice. Right?
We've been saying since the beginning, kids have somewhat of innate immunity. So why are some reasons that we say in the office to get it? Some of them include that primary COVID still can be serious. I had a 20-year-old who's on a vent for 2 weeks. He was big, so it's rare, but there still is a primary COVID in getting sick, especially for the older kids, the older teenagers. There's a multi-system inflammatory disease in kids. It peaks at around 8 to 9 years of age. Had a couple of cases. Those get really sick. It's still rare.
I had 2 of those in the PICU for like a week.
So
one of them with an ejection fraction of like 40%.
Yeah.
A left ventricular. I mean, sick.
It usually hits about 3 weeks after you get COVID.
Pressors and everything.
Also, long hauler. They're starting to describe in pediatrics more long hauler, fatigue, headaches. Coughing. Also, I like to point out if they see grandma, and often they say, yes, is grandma vaccinated? Often, yes, they're boosted, but she's still at higher risk. And the high-risk person to grandma ends up being the grandkids.
Right.
So that's another relative reason.
That, to me, is the most compelling reason.
Right.
Just because I think that's where the greatest risk is. Like if you don't want to listen to me about the other things, because I do think it's reasonable, and I always go through the same thing that I go through with any type of thing that we're discussing that has any controversy to it at all. What's the litmus test I'm using? What did I or would I do with my own kids?
Right. So
this is why.
That is the most compelling. But the other two that work that maybe shouldn't be as compelling, but are, one is travel.
Yeah.
They want to go on their vacation, whether it's to the islands or in Florida, and they're like, well, it'd be much easier if you get vaccinated.
Sure.
The second one, and we'll get to, is the new guidelines that if you're fully vaccinated and you get exposed, you can keep going to school.
Yes.
You can keep playing sports if you're fully vaccinated, which we'll go over the definition.
Yeah.
So for a sports kid in middle school or high school, he hears that and says, okay, I'll get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's similar to the compulsion that a lot of employers have now. It's like, I guess, even for somebody who doesn't want to get it, my job's more important to me than my stance on this, right? And like, okay, so morally, I'm a little waffly on that because I think you should get it just because it's good science, right? But if that's what compels you, then,
We both had those parents. I asked him to be vaccinated. He said, yes, I am, but only because I had to. I don't want to. I'm like,
fine.
Okay.
Yeah. and I think that was another thing that I think continues to come up, and I think maybe hopefully less so, is that, hey, listen, how can you tell me I should get vaccinated if people are still getting sick and hospitalized with it? And here's the rub. It's because people tend dramatically to get less sick even when they get the COVID if they've been vaccinated.
Right.
They tend not to die nearly as much if they've had the vaccine. So yeah, the vaccine is not perfect, and a very good, a very close relative of mine had said to me, like, I thought a vaccine was supposed to prevent a disease, and optimally yes, but the second best thing is that it temporizes it to the extent where it's not nearly as deadly.
Just like the flu, you can still get the flu, but if you had the vaccine, it's usually going to be less severe. So it's
a discussion that takes some time, and I think we're both willing to do that, and I think so are our partners, but it does after a while start to you start to feel like you are trying to teach somebody immunology initially sometimes.
Right. And then, again, getting into this vaccine hesitancy, and we touched on it last episode, that one of the biggest parental concerns, and we share that, it certainly got our antennas up, is this post-vaccine myocarditis, usually 3 to 7 days after the second dose, almost always in boys. And older boys, teens in their 20s, it seems to be related to testosterone levels. It's not nearly as severe as the myocarditis heart problems that you get from actual COVID. there's a 10 times greater risk getting myocarditis from COVID-19 infection than from getting myocarditis from the vaccine.
Yeah, 10 times.
Yep.
Yeah. So okay, if you're afraid of myocarditis, what you should be doing is getting the shot.
Exactly.
Right? Because you have a 10 times higher chance of getting myocarditis if you don't have the shot.
One caveat that's not in the CDC, though, when you look at it, some countries in Europe are giving the second shot a little bit later. You have up to 42 days to get the second shot with Moderna. I think both Moderna and Pfizer. So I've had some older teens they're concerned about it say, you know what, let's give the second dose 5 weeks later instead of 3 weeks later. It probably does take this tiny risk and make it a little bit less, and they still should be well covered. Right. So I have done that. And then there's also the good news, bad news data that came out at the end of December on getting the vaccine to the younger kids under age 5. Good news was that for 6 months to 2 years, it worked really well. They gave 1/10 the dose. Now at 5 to 12-year-olds, they gave 1/3 the dose. Again, for our vaccine hesitant families, we tell them that it's 1/3 the dose from 5 to 12. So that's why they get such little symptoms, maybe some fatigue, some pain at the site, some muscle aches, but not that much. And that's why we weren't seeing things like post-vaccine myocarditis. Now, at the under 5, they tried 1/10 the dose. Worked well for 6 months to 2 years. Did not work well for 2 to 4 years of age. So they have to go back to the drawing board. They talked about giving a third vaccine for these 2 to 4-year-olds. We're learning a lot about the immune competency of normal kids through all the studies on COVID.
I think we're going to learn a ton from this unfortunate pandemic, right? The other thing is this is what science is. Science is iterating. Science is taking something that works and trying to make it work better, or finding out what's optimal, right?
Right.
And I think when a lot of folks say like, you had to go back and you're changing the rules now, right? Well, that's what science is. Science is the more information you get, then you enact that information, right?
Exactly. And so then you get to scenarios in the office. So you've had these scenarios, Matt. A vaccinated mom comes in very frustrated because their usually teen child refuses to get vaccinated. I've had a few of those.
Yeah, couple. Of course, these kids we've all been taken care of since they were babies, so we can speak frankly to them.
Right. And then
man.
Unvaccinated parents, usually dads, coming in, trying to talk their kid to not get vaccinated. The kid wants to be vaccinated.
Right. Yes.
Have you had that happen?
A few times.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had one that was very, very fun. I had an 18-year-old in with her mom, and we talked about vaccinated. She said, he doesn't want to be vaccinated. I don't want to be vaccinated. I think she said a friend of my family is in pharma, and they don't want to get vaccinated. And then before I kicked her out, I always talk about, do you want to be called grandma? She's like, of course not. He's not going to do that, blah, blah, blah. He kicked her out. I look at the kid. It's a nice kid. I've known him. He looks at me and said, okay, Dr. Walter, first things first. I'm fully vaccinated, and I'm having sex.
Yeah, there you go. So much for a parent's hopes and dreams, right?
So I certainly had a discussion about being safe, and I'd rather him be abstinent. But, he's 18, and he looked at it. He was going to go to college next year and said, I want to get fully vaccinated. I don't want to have my sports affected. Yeah. It wasn't worth telling my mom. I hate that. I hate when kids are either way, when they're not being completely honest. But I'm sure that's playing out many places.
I appreciate when they are honest with us, when they have some time with us alone and they're really willing to share what their, again, hopes, dreams, fears, real life is about, and knowing that that's going to be, it goes back to confidentiality, right?
Right. So, all right, next, Maddie, Omicron.
Yes,
Omicron. I want to just start out by saying,
Omicron.
I've been telling people I feel really good about Omicron. I'm actually, from a global standpoint, I think this is great. From the cases rising right now, that's tough, but we have been saying that viruses and natural selection tends to go with more infectious, but less severe, less deadly. Delta came, more infectious, wasn't really less deadly. And that was horrible. But this really does seem to be less deadly. And this is going to get us closer to getting out of this. Obviously, this pandemic doesn't end right away. It's going to be over when this becomes the flu, right? That you just have cases and you have outbreaks and you get vaccinated each year. And Omicron is getting us back to there. Yes, there's a lot more cases. And I don't know about you, but I've been seeing a lot of TV spots about children's hospitals filling up and CHOP and in Texas. And at the same time, I'm in the office when I diagnose the kid with Omicron saying he's probably going to be fine. Okay, let's talk. Even before I test him, if he's positive, he'll likely be fine. So even these kids are being admitted, they're not going into the PICU, the intensive care unit as much, and they're not as sick. And certainly the adults aren't. So I look at it as, okay, this is the next progression to getting out of this.
What's your understanding of the immunology on this, right? Because forever we have said to people, hey, listen, just because you have one virus doesn't mean you can't get the other, right? Do you think it's just, the Omicron is pressuring the Delta out?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to take your seat here. Thank you very much. It's like Ring Around the Rosie or whatever that game's
taking
called.
It over. Yeah, there still is Delta, but every single time you hear about the percentage going up of Omicron. The other thing that makes that we'll get to, but the number of cases means nothing anymore.
No.
First of all, a lot of people are rapid tested; they're not even reported, and it's really about hospitalizations and deaths.
Yeah, and even the tracing has started to become, much less. I'm not sure it was ever super effective,
right?
But it's even less effective than not so effective,
right? And then the other pathophysiology of Omicron is that it is super at multiplying in the nasal passages and such, but it doesn't go down to the bronchi.
Yeah.
It just stops.
I think that's a big.
That's why you're not seeing these people intubated.
Yeah,
and that's a huge difference. We all are learning the Greek alphabet more for all you non-fraternity.
Hopefully, we don't have to learn too much more.
Were you in a frat at F&M?
No,
I was in for a year.
I
was a 6-year med. I wanted 1 year for parties because I wasn't, Mr. Social.
Come on.
But
you're like a magnet for romance.
Yeah, not. So did you see though? Did you read about that? They after their different variants, they skipped the Greek letter nu because they didn't want to have something saying it's the new variant. That would be confusing.
That's smart.
And the next one in the Greek alphabet was XI. Z.
Yeah.
And you know why they skipped that?
Yeah. That sounds a little bit too Chinese, doesn't it?
Yeah, the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, and using it saying it's the Z variant would be kind of awkward. So,
who decides these things, by the way? This is the World Health Organization.
I think WHO. I think. And do you know the Greek and Latin alphabet?
I know. I know the one I use.
Okay. I used to know. Do you know the Hebrew alphabet?
Sadly.
Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. That's all I know.
I know the beginning of the Spanish alphabet. A, B, C, D.
Nice. 10 years of Hebrew school. I know like 5 letters. All right. So breakthrough infections. We've kind of touched on it. It's not surprising because Omicron is so much more infectious. We also seems to be that if you had Delta already, you have no protection pretty much against Omicron. But if you get Omicron, you're protected against Delta. So another reason why it's going to push Delta away, right?
All right. But, like I think we've both talked about before, long story short, pretty much almost everybody will probably get some variation of COVID.
Yep. All right. Let's go to the CDC.
Good golly. You're going to make us do this?
Isolation, quarantine guidelines.
First of all, let's say this, right? So if you go on the CDC website and you try to interpret what they say, you really have to sit back and think because it's not, in my mind, presented in a terribly logical way.
Not just your mind, everybody's
right?
mind.
I mean, good God, pay somebody $3 million and have them write it the right way, right?
Not only that, sometimes it leads. It's so
confusing.
It's so misleading. So I'll jump to. On the website, until yesterday, maybe they changed it, when you went under CDC guidelines for K through 12 schools, at the very top it said updated December 29th. I showed you this, 2021, which is 2 days after they got to the rule of 5 days, right? So this is after that. And then it says, see the new rules. And then the whole thing talks about that K through 12 has to isolate if they get COVID at least 10 days. So many pediatricians looked at it. There's a Facebook group thing. We said, okay, it's a different rule for school kids. But and then I had the ID guy, Craig Shapiro at DuPont, call me and said, it's not. It should be 5 days. And I said, but look at this, Craig. He said, well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
The CDC website's wrong.
It's pathetic. Like, please, can somebody get like a high school English teacher to write these things or somebody who has a sense of clarity,
Right.
Like, again, it's about putting yourself in somebody's shoes who doesn't have a science background. I mean, frankly, it confuses us, right? I mean, I have to go through and rewrite it for myself. I'll tell you a little, secret. Anytime I see something like this, I cut and paste it into a Word document and then rearrange it so it makes sense for me.
Right.
Right. And I did that. I mean, that's what we did for our practice, right? I mean, I did that and then we posted it.
And then the next, well, we did it too. And then we're like,
Yeah.
oh, what the CDC
Right, it
was
changed
wrong.
again. That's right.
So, and I gotta say, we don't get
Click on our link.
Right. We don't get too political about this, but
Yes.
I was thinking right away, and a couple other my colleagues said the same thing, that if we had been in the prior administration and they did that, we'd be like, they're incompetent. It's all politics.
I think it's just politics. I think it's just,
And then you get to the actual big change, which is the 5-day change.
Yeah.
And controversial in many ways. We'll get to some of them. Was it driven by the economy a bit? Yes.
Yeah.
But is that sometimes reasonable, having everything shut down and knowing that this is a milder?
Right.
So there's an argument to be made. So it didn't really – I know there's been a lot of nurses, doctors really raging about these changes. I personally didn't have a big problem with them. I do agree that they probably should have had some kind of testing recommended on day 5 before you get out of isolation.
Yes.
So the new guidelines, if you test positive, you have to isolate for 5 days. No longer 10 days, no longer 7 if you get tested, just 5 days. And it's true for everyone, regardless of vaccination status, unless you're a health caregiver.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. As Rob said, so isolation is used to separate people infected with COVID from those who are not infected. I think it's always worth redefining these terms, isolation and quarantine, because I think people get confused. So you isolate when you've been infected with the virus, even if you don't have symptoms. So people who are in isolation should stay at home for 5 days, and it's safe for them to be around until it's safe for them to be around others, and that is 5 days. At home, anybody who's sick or infected should stay separate from the other folks, stay in a specific sick room or area if that's possible, should monitor your symptoms. If you have any emergency warning sign, and that especially involves things like breathing difficulties, etc., then that's when you should seek emergency care. The ERs are being overwhelmed by people who are there essentially just for a COVID test, which is really taxing the system.
Exactly. You also should wear a mask when you're around other people. And when you calculate your full 5-day isolation period, day 0 is your first day of symptoms. So if you get sick on a Thursday, then day 1 is Friday. Then Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you're out of that home isolation on Wednesday.
Yes. It only took the CDC a year to put that on the website,
right.
by the way.
And then if you don't have symptoms but you just test positive, then day 0 is, again, the day you test. And then after those 5 days, you can leave your house, but you continue to wear a well-fitting mask an additional 5 days to minimize risk to others. But again, they don't require a test to get out of isolation. I think, and that's where reality came in, they made this change just when there's a shortage of tests.
Yeah.
So I can understand. They said, well, if we make this a requirement, the ER is even going to be more inundated, and people are going to go nuts, and they're going to just ignore it.
Right.
So they made it. The other thing that has come out of this, we talked about a well-fitting mask. I don't know about you. All day people come in with cloth masks, and I tell them it's not good enough.
Right.
You need to get a
if you
surgical
listen
mask
to our
or
old
an
friend,
N95.
Dr. Osterholm, we should be wearing, professionally fitted, masks. And so when the folks come in with essentially like glorified socks over their heads, that really isn't terribly effective. Yeah. So the exception here, of course, is for some of our younger patients, or for some of our patients who are otherwise, compromised in terms of their baseline status. So some of the kids that we have in the practice with autism or other compromises, like a lot of those children are not going to be able to keep a mask on, and for them, they have to stay home for 10 days if they test positive. So since young children can't be alone, they're oftentimes then cared for by their parents, and the parents may be COVID negative, but now they've been exposed to the child, and then they have to quarantine, and it is a mess.
Right. So for little kids, you can't mask. It really stays 10 days. But then there's the only other separate rules that are not general population. That's for health care workers. So if you are a healthcare worker and if you're a healthcare worker and get COVID-19, no matter what your status is, then you have to be out 10 days, but you can come back on day 7 if you have a negative test between 5 and 7 days. They put a contingency if there is a healthcare shortage, and I think both of us are dealing with some healthcare shortages, that you can come back in 5 days just like the general population, with or without a test. Then they put the crisis mode that basically, if there's a crisis healthcare mode, you don't have to stay out at all. You can come right back in if you're not having symptoms or they're
Wear a
mild
mask
symptoms.
and come on into work.
And they were right in the beginning of this, and I won't say the name, but there's a hospital near Chester who multiple nurses said, oh, right now they're in crisis, so if you have COVID, you have to come in. Unless you're having symptoms. So that was rough. And it gets back to, okay, we're talking about celebrate healthcare workers. I know there's a shortage, but is this really looking out for healthcare workers?
Well,
I don't know.
You know, we ourselves haven't really been in the situation that a lot of, I think, the folks that we know who take care of adults have, wherein we're just seeing like death and mayhem, you know, much of the day. We don't see that, but it's still exhausting, you know, and I just can't imagine people who usually deal with so much more serious illness than we do with COVID feeling compelled to come into work to confront that, you know, when they're sick. It's hard.
Right. It is. And so next, what about the exposures? If you're the new rules for being exposed to COVID-19 with a close contact,
yeah, so these are also a little bit tricky. So if you're exposed to COVID-19 with a close contact and you were vaccinated and you've received your booster, or you haven't had a booster, but you completed the primary series of either Pfizer or Moderna, the mRNA vaccines, within the last 6 months, or you completed the primary series of the J&J vaccine within the last 2 months, then there's no quarantine necessary or isolation necessary. You just need to wear a mask around others. So this is what's being considered to be, you know, quote unquote, fully vaccinated and boosted, right?
Right.
Optimally, you want to test on day 5 if possible, you know, just to kind of catch anything that might have squeaked through, but it's not required. And then again, if you develop symptoms, then get a test and stay home.
A good reason to get boosted or vaccinated so you don't have to stay home.
Have you been
5
boosted,
days.
Rob?
I have been. Now, if you're exposed to COVID-19 and you have not gotten your eligible booster or haven't completed the primary series, then you do need to stay home in quarantine for 5 days. But you can get out after 5 days, but continue to wear a mask around others for 5 additional days. Again, as Matt said, for younger children, kids who can't mask, they can't wear a mask. So basically, they still need to do the full 10 days quarantine. They do say test on day 5 if possible.
Yeah, so for quarantine rules, not being boosted, if eligible, is treated really the same way as having had no vaccines at all.
If you're a healthcare worker and you are fully boosted, fully vaccinated, and you're exposed, no restrictions. They do want you to test on day 2 and then day 5 to 7. If there's a shortage, there's no restrictions and no testing needed. Same thing with a crisis. If you are not fully vaccinated and you're exposed as a healthcare worker, you need to be quarantined for 10 days or 7 days with a negative test, so longer than the general population. But if there's a contingency, there's no work restrictions at all, not even 5 days. And you just want you to test a lot, day 1, 2, 3, and 5 to 7. And remember, people who have had COVID-19 within the past 90 days and recovered still should wear a mask indoors in public for 10 days if they've been exposed and monitor for symptoms. But basically, they get kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card for a few months, up to 90 days, where they really don't need to be tested if they're sick, unless something classic like losing sense of taste or smell. I've had a few college patients who got COVID over the break. They're like, this is great. I don't have to worry for a few months.
Right.
I'll make sure I'm vaccinated, but I don't have to get tested as much.
Right.
And it makes life easier for them. And one last thing. There's been quite a few articles, different places, pointing out that through all of this, we really have done nothing to prepare for another pandemic. Even, we're just not ramping up, not funding things to look for the future. Nothing. And that is scary.
That's a what have we learned from this moment?
There will be another one, hopefully not with our careers
right.
At our stage, but who knows if it comes from the wild and with climate change and all these different changes, maybe that's going to fuel more pandemics. And it's sad that we're not working on it. We'll be right back.
Yep. And we're back. On to things GI. Once again, thanks to that GI guru, Dr. Carlo DiLorenzo from the Ohio State University, for so much great GI stuff in his 3 talks at last summer's Hot Topics conference. In our last podcast, we covered regurgitation. As we always say, there are always exceptions to the rules.
Yes, there is, Maddie. Literally the day after we published the podcast, I think back in September, I had a young baby in my office, under 3 months. He'd already been on hydrolyzed formula, already been on famotidine twice a day for reflux, and it just kept getting worse until he really didn't want to eat, and it was just miserable. I did start him on a PPI, which we usually don't do. I got GI involved. They did an imaging study, just showed reflux. They didn't have a lot more advice to offer to maybe just admit him for not eating. And I texted you and said, okay, you talked about Carafate in young kids, and I kind of poo-pooed it, but how do you do it? And Matt gave me the recipe, and I put him on Carafate, and he got much better. I think he saved some NG feeding at admission, so
That's
hate
good.
to say it, Matt,
Hey,
but
man.
kudos to you. I might not ever do that again.
Right.
It is nice sometimes
It's
that
nice to have it at the bottom of your pocket, right?
and we general pediatricians that we can kind of have something that goes beyond the specialist. It's nice to say to the specialist, hey, I did this and it worked. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
doesn't happen much.
Yeah, I'm not. Again, it is something I don't use often. Gosh, when it works, it's not a lifesaver. I mean, you can put the kid in the hospital, but it certainly keeps somebody out of the hospital.
I just use Carafate, hopefully successfully, for a kid with really bad aphthous ulcers the back of their throat that was just failing magic mouthwash. The lidocaine Maalox liquid Benadryl, and it only helps him about 15 minutes. And I went on online to look at other ideas, and they were like, you can kind of gargle with Carafate. That
There you
maybe
go.
work better. So
Well, I just learned something from you.
there you go.
That's a first.
So
All right, let's move on. So let's talk about symptoms we see regularly that can be part of a functional GI disorder, specifically abdominal pain. Now remember, a functional symptom is a medical symptom with no known physical cause. In other words, there's no structural or pathologically defined disease to explain the symptom. The use of the term functional symptom does not assume that the symptom isn't real or confabulated. I always wanted to say confabulated. Only that the body is not functioning as expected. It does not mean that the symptom, like abdominal pain, is not real. It's not truly painful.
that it's so important because in medical school when they said functional, our brains like
We
not
roll
real.
our eyes
Yeah,
like.
Yep.
So irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, is a functional GI disorder. Functional GI disorders, which are now referred to as, quote, disorders of the gut-brain interactions. Ooh, Rob, we talked about this a couple of years
Yes,
ago.
we did.
Man.
We
I think this is coming full circle here. Are related to problems with how the brain and the gut work together. These problems can cause the gut to be more sensitive and can change how the muscles in the bowel contract. Other symptoms we may see in pediatrics that can be functional are things like chest pain, fatigue, and headaches. So all things that are real to the person who's suffering from them, but is really difficult to test for.
And our traditional medical mindset has always been to first rule out organic disease. And for many reasons, including medical legal ones, there is this fear of missing an organic disease. But as Dr. DiLorenzo pointed out, there's not that much fear of missing a functional disorder. Parents really understand and lock in on organic diseases, those diseases that can be treated with a pill or procedure. And most of us docs do have a bit of a bias against mind and brain disturbances. This bias combines with our other medical legal fears of missing something to make us test and test and test. Carlo pointed out that in his career, he has certainly faced complaints from families and especially parents that he missed food allergies, reflux, inflammatory bowel disease, eosinophilic gastroenteritis, but he has never, ever had even one parent complain that he missed anxiety, even when he missed anxiety. But we should worry about missing a functional disorder and not diagnosing something like anxiety in a timely manner.
So we should know the red flags of a history of abdominal pain that would make us worry about organic disease. These types of clues include things like persistent right upper quadrant or right lower quadrant pain, associated arthritis or perianal disease from Crohn's disease. I always take a quick peek there if chronic problems exist. Also concerning our swallowing problems, persistent vomiting, involuntary weight loss, poor linear growth, or delays in puberty. Again, a lot of these things are seen with inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. GI blood loss, fevers, and strong family history of celiac or inflammatory bowel disease or peptic ulcer disease are also important red flags. But some traditional red flags really shouldn't be as concerning. One of these is nighttime abdominal pain, and the other is joint pain without arthritis. Multiple studies show that these symptoms are not red flags for organic disease, and that both irritable bowel syndrome and sleep deprivation will cause these same things.
So those are some red flags, but then he introduced, I thought, a really neat concept of green flags. Green flags are things in the history for abdominal pain that might make you think, hey, this is much more likely to be functional. Green flags include persistent abdominal pain that doesn't change with any activity and happens all day, no matter what. Another green flag is having multiple somatic symptoms with the pain. And another is a chief complaint that nothing we've tried ever works and everything we've tried causes side effects. Another green flag is a strong family history of irritable bowel syndrome. Another is anxious or catastrophic type parents. You need to figure out what the parental agenda of the visit is, what they think is going on, and why they're coming to the office. Now, some of this advice from Dr. DiLorenzo, you have to remember, comes from a specialist in a children's hospital. So his patients coming in may be more skewed towards doctor-seeking behavior than some of the typical families that we have in our primary care office.
Yeah, and Dr. DiLorenzo also stressed the importance of not just a good history, but of letting the parent provide that history without interrupting. Rob, you and I have talked about this before, about the fact that during an average encounter, a doctor usually interrupts the patient after about 11 seconds, and that we need to let our patients tell their story.
I mean, you and I talking, we interrupt each other after like 2 seconds.
You betcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you just... That's hard, especially these days when we were so busy with COVID.
I mean, it's hard. Interrupting you, people interrupt after a few minutes. Keep going, man. No problem.
That's hard, especially these days when we were so busy with COVID issues and the EMR and other stressors, but you need to let them tell their story. One specific piece of advice for us practitioners is that the parents will really remember that you are listening to them if you sit down while you talk to them, instead of standing in front of them and their child.
Yeah, that's true. I never really thought why I do it because I started sitting more when I had back issues, but it does come naturally. I do try to sit next to the family. Often I'm on my stool unless I'm doing the exam so I can talk to them. How about you? Do you stand up the whole time or do you sit next to them?
I move all over the room. I really do. It kind of depends.
Matt's very random, moving around.
I'm over here. Oh, he's over there now. That's right.
Pacing back and forth.
Indeed. So here's probably the biggest take-home message that's not new, but it's worth repeating. There are only 2 tests that are cost-effective in the workup of abdominal pain if there are no red flags, and those are the blood test for tissue transglutaminase IgA. Now remember, you should probably also do a quantitative IgA along with that.
A TTG,
and a quantitative IgA to screen for celiac disease, and a stool calprotectin to screen for inflammatory disease. He also stressed that if a history doesn't go along with a diagnosis of constipation, there's no reason to routinely get an abdominal x-ray to look for occult constipation. Still, the combination of parental anxiety and physician insecurity can be a powerful motivator to get more and more tests. We both know that when the parents are very anxious to do something, then we're more likely to do something, right? Yeah. Right. And I think we're both pretty conservative with our test ordering.
Right.
But there is a point at which you say, that's not an unreasonable idea. Let's get a blah, 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 right?
Right. And he specifically suggested that we don't chase things like sedimentation rates of 19. And a lot of the audience laughed at that because we've all been there. You end up getting a sed rate, which is a screen, a very non-specific screen for inflammation, and it's a little bit high. And like, what do I do with that? So that's the problem with, if you get a test, you got to do something with it or interpret it. And now often the family gets the blood results before we do through the portal. So I haven't even seen them, and they're calling up, the sed rate's 19. What does that mean?
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings about that. Yeah, because so much of those test results are a matter of interpretation.
Right.
So that poor parent usually spends, while they're waiting for us to call them back, right? They've spent 3 hours on the internet
looking up, sed rate can be with cancer.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And they're getting themselves crazy. Lastly, again, not addressing functional pain early, not talking about that early, can delay the diagnosis of functional abdominal pain. And we should usually start when we're thinking of that with abdominal pain by considering anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety is at epidemic proportions these days in kids, and I think, largely in the population. All kids with chronic anxiety should be screened with a GAD-7 or a SCARED survey or something similar. The SCARED survey is a bit more appropriate for the younger kids, but honestly, Rob, I've used SCARED surveys on older kids because there's so much more information there, right?
Right.
40 some odd questions that really are helpful and kind of tease apart what kind of anxiety do you have. Right?
Over the last few years, more and more when I have the nurses say, when do we screen them for anxiety? Like my list of things to do a screen of anxiety has just gotten so long.
Yeah.
It's like everything besides ear pain, screen for anxiety. I mean, it really is something that we should be very proactive about.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon in kids with irritable bowel syndrome or functional abdominal pain to benefit, honestly, from some of the medications that are typically used for anxiety. SSRIs like fluoxetine, which is Prozac. If something like a smooth muscle relaxer has been tried, something along the lines of Levsin, which is icosapine, or Bentyl, which is dicyclamine, have been trialed and failed, I'll be honest with you, Rob, more often than not, I don't even use those medicines. If I think that this is anxiety, I'm going to try to have that sometimes is a hard and other times is much easier conversation than you'd expect with the parents and the child and say like, hey, listen, one of the tacks that we've always taken when somebody has had chronic pain is, hey, listen, this must really be affecting the way you feel about things in general. Maybe we can help with that and that'll help with the pain. It's kind of a soft landing into that discussion, on some levels.
Right. I don't use it that much, but especially Bentyl, if I have someone who abdominal pain is a big part of it for a while, and I think it's functional, like irritable bowel type syndrome. Mm-hmm. As I'm working on the anxiety, I'll say, let's try the Bentyl.
Yeah. Have you tried
for
Carafate?
A couple weeks. Everybody gets Carafate now.
Let's put Carafate in the water with fluoride.
Exactly.
Dr. DiLorenzo did mention that hypnotherapy has shown a lot of promise in kids with functional abdominal pain, which sounds great, but I don't know anybody doing this. Rob, do you?
I know nobody who's doing it. Cognitive behavioral therapy is more of what we're used to doing. Sometimes there's a specific issue with abdominal pain as a result. It seems most of the time it's more of a global anxiety issue. And for that, you really need a good child psychologist to address the root causes. Yes, there's other things to relax with anxiety like yoga, relaxation apps like Calm can help. So can having parents distract their kids if they're having discomfort, and practicing avoiding negativity with kids and telling their parents, stop asking them if their stomach still hurts all day. Because that's going to make them think of their stomach still hurting. And lastly, he just touched on the FODMAPs diet for functional abdominal pain. FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which are short-chain carbohydrates or sugars that the small intestine absorbs poorly. Some people experience digestive distress after eating these types of foods.
On a FODMAPs diet, one needs to avoid things with excess fructose, like apples, mangoes, pears, watermelon, honey, fruit juice, and high fructose corn syrup. One should also avoid lactose, like, of course, regular milk has. Most yogurts do as well, as do soft and ripe cheeses, cottage cheese, and creams. It's also recommended to eat fewer fructans, like asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, eggplant, and onion, and to avoid cereals like wheat and rye. So basically going gluten-free. Also, fewer galactans, including legumes like baked beans, chickpeas, and lentils. And no polyols, including apples, avocado, cherries, nectarines, pears, plums, prunes. I always forget nectarines even exist until I see it. Cauliflower, mushrooms, and sweet corn, as well as sweeteners like sorbitol and xylitol. I mean, what's left?
I know. You look at this list like, oh my God. Have you ever tried a FODMAP diet, Matt?
Come on.
Have you? No, okay, so it's hard. I've tried it. I tried it myself, and this is what you can eat. Some fruits, bananas, blueberries, cranberries, grapefruits, oranges, raspberries, rhubarb, strawberry rhubarb pie, strawberries, vegetables like artichokes, bok choy, celery, green beans, lettuce, olives, but I hate olives, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, yams, some gluten-free spreads like spelt cereals. It's disgusting.
Spelt.
Rice is okay. Polenta's okay. And lactose-free milk, oat milk, hard cheeses. Sometimes ice cream substitutes like gelati or a sorbet can also have maple syrup. So it is really hard. So I will personally tell you that last year I tried to do this, and went all in and was really leaning on the blueberries and the sweet potatoes. And I felt better. My stomach felt better. Everything was going well. And then my kidney stones came back. Because guess what? It turns out that sweet potatoes and blueberries are high in oxalate. So bottom line, never treat yourself.
Yeah.
But I do sometimes, if I have an older teen or a college age kid who's had lots of GI issues and pain and burping and such, and we go over anxiety, and they've seen lots of specialists, I sometimes will say, okay, here's a handout about FODMAPs. It doesn't mean you have to do this 100%, but maybe reduce some of these FODMAPs and try to eat a little bit more of the non-FODMAP and see if you feel better. It's just something, I think it can be a real thing for people. It's just really hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We don't see the GI folks do this very often, at least the consultations that we get. I mean, I've seen it occasionally, but it's like a last ditch, like, I've done everything I can for these poor people, let's try this.
Exactly.
Because as you said, it's a difficult thing to do.
It's
right?
tough.
Okay, so finally, Dr. DiLorenzo's last talk was on myths in GI.
His first myth is that gluten is bad for you. A lot of the anti-gluten buzz was first generated about 10 years ago when celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow and Miley Cyrus jumped on the anti-gluten bandwagon, fueled by Novak Djokovic, currently ranked the #1 male tennis player in the world by the ATP, who claim that going gluten-free helps athletic performance. And I love that Dr. DiLorenzo, whose daughter is a professional tennis player, called him Novaks instead of Novak, because while most of us know he's probably the greatest tennis player of all time, he's also one of the most disliked tennis players of all time, and he's quite the anti-vaxxer. He even hosted his own tournament at the peak of one of the COVID waves with little regard to COVID safety measures, and guess what? It became a spreader event. And right now he's in the middle of a controversy because he's been invited to play at the Australian Open, but the Premier of Australia is saying you have to prove that you have an exception to not getting vaccinated because he's not vaccinated. So it's blowing up.
You mean being the greatest tennis player on the planet doesn't count as an exception?
It probably, that's why they wanted him, right? They wanted the TV ratings. That was the exception. But like Australia is very strict. I mean, they're really strict about COVID. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview this morning on one of the channels, and it was from a public health person from Australia, and it was like, yeah, aside from China and North Korea, Australia is like the most strict.
Absolutely. Yeah. And no one gets...
Which is funny because they're a pretty laid-back country.
But no one gets special treatment. Except maybe Novak Djokovic.
But we digress. As we know, there are only 3 recognized gluten disorders. So getting back to the gluten controversy here. The first is an actual allergy to wheat, which is IgE-mediated, and which affects maybe 0.1% of people. It affects mostly children, but can also be an occupational hazard for bakers. That stinks, right?
Yep.
The second recognized gluten disorder is true celiac disease, or what we used to call celiac sprue. This affects about 1% of the population. It's an autoimmune disease that's diagnosed routinely by a blood test like the tissue transglutaminase IgA, or by biopsy for confirmation. And there's the entity of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, for which there's no test, and it's kind of a diagnosis of exclusion, and it doesn't have any genetic markers, so it's another one of those really kind of vague diagnoses. I know.
I used to always kind of poo-poo it. My medical student roommate went back at reunion. He's like, I have this now. And he said, I thought it was ridiculous. I stopped gluten. I felt great. Then I went back on it. Right away, it all came back.
So
it is
interesting.
Real. It is real. There's no test for it. It's real.
And of all the reasons people give for avoiding gluten, like for digestive health or nutritional value or weight loss, healthier skin, improved joint pain, better mental function, depression relief, and asthma improvement, and even better athletic performance, the least common reason that people go gluten-free actually is because they have celiac disease.
Exactly. And, Dr. DiLorenzo reviewed the main articles concerning gluten and noted that it's usually fruit and not gluten that induces most of these symptoms. And most people who self-report non-celiac gluten sensitivity have no change in symptoms off of gluten compared to controls when you really do a good study. And there are no effects on performance enhancement in the short term with a gluten-free diet. Bottom line, Dr. DiLorenzo does not think gluten-free is usually particularly helpful.
Yeah, but we have to add that for some teens, and especially adults, there is reported improvement in how they feel off of gluten. So we have no problem if somebody wants to try it as long as they have a balanced diet.
Right. And the next myth he mentioned, that stimulant laxatives are addictive and can cause dependency and lazy colons, maybe even colon cancer. So we're talking about Senna, like in Senecot, and Bisacodyl, also known as Dulcolax. And they've been traditionally discouraged in pediatrics. I think even in our first episodes on Poopalooza, we were not very positive about them. But he made the point that they're good medications. They can help kids get an urge to go. Huge difference in treatment of chronic constipation. And he shared multiple papers about the efficacy and long-term safety of laxatives, including Senna, for child constipation, and studies showing that there's no evidence of alterations in smooth muscle colon or in increased GI tumors using Senna chronically. So his take-home message was, don't be afraid of laxatives longer term. And the week I got back from Disney, from the meeting, I did start to use laxatives a little bit more aggressively with kids who are chronically constipated. And it's helping. Have you used them a little bit more commonly?
I already used them, somewhat commonly. Yeah. Although I can't get the dose of Senicides. I always have to look it up.
Yeah.
So another constipation myth that he attacked is that increased fiber will help constipation. He argued that it often can make constipation worse. So yes.
That surprised me.
Yeah, it surprised me as well. So fiber is good and can prevent constipation, but once you're constipated, adding fiber often is not helpful and can be bad. So okay if you're preventing it and it's working, not okay if you're already constipated. Right? So fiber can make big poops even bigger, and too much fiber can cause fiber diarrhea and excess gas and bloating. For many kids with chronic constipation who are taking a lot of fiber, stopping or reducing the fiber can improve the constipation and the symptoms. While I certainly still encourage more fiber in the diet of kids with repetitive constipation, his comments did give us a little bit of pause, and when I have someone getting lots of fiber with worsening constipation, I'm going to think about maybe cutting back on the fiber a little bit.
Yep. And another myth he exploded for me is that drinking more water is always better if you're constipated. Now, the pathophysiology of colon fluids is that we may drink 2 liters of fluids a day, but our saliva supplies another 1.5 liters to the gut. And there's also gastric excretions of another 1.5 liters. And then there's liver bile and pancreatic juices, another liter, another 2 liters of intestinal secretions, and then the small intestine starts resorbing 8 or more liters. So basically, what we drink is just a drop in the bucket to the total fluids our gut's seeing. How much we're drinking and increasing the drinking really isn't going to make that much different for constipation. And bottom line, he feels that if you're constipated, you should have a normal fiber intake and a normal fluid intake. Don't keep trying to increase it more and more.
Finally, Dr. DiLorenzo's last myth is about cheese, and that's something that's near and dear to Rob and my heart.
Man.
See our episodes on Poopalooza, and also see our discussion of the infamous cheese grandmom.
I saw this before the conference. He sent me his slides, and I saw this stuff about cheese, and I texted him like, I disagree. I think cheese is a big problem. He's like, you're on. I'm going to embarrass you.
He probably has no problem embarrassing either one of us, right? No, he does not. He does not think that cheese is a factor in constipation, and that diet is not important for the treatment of a child with constipation, but it may be important for constipation prevention. That goes back to what he was talking about with the fiber, right?
Exactly. So he cited a paper from the American Journal of Public Health in 1990 that constipated subjects reported lower than average intake of cheese, beans, peas, milk, meat, sweet beverages, and fruits and vegetables. Now, again, I told him before the talk that I was going to call BS on this, so he added 3 more slides. At the top of each slide, it said, why Rob is wrong about cheese. I got to say, I still disagree. There's so many times in follow-up when I talked about constipation, I ask, how's the constipation? And they say, as soon as we stop the cheese, it got much better.
I agree with you.
Do you agree?
Uh-huh.
Yes. I'm not.
It's okay that we that we want to debate a world-renowned specialist
based on all our experience,
based on our anecdotal evidence
here in Delaware.
That's right.
All right, so that wraps up things for today, boys and girls. Again, the next couple episodes on migraines is going to be epic. So many pearls and advice on migrainers or migraineurs?
Isn't it like, weren't you always taught like migraineurs?
I wasn't taught anything
like
by the headache
Frenchy
guru
type
himself,
thing.
Dr. Mark DiCapella. So don't miss it, Susan. Say goodnight, Matthew.
Good night, man.
Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.